Good evening, everyone. My name is My name is Chetan Manikantan. I go by Chet. I'm the founder of Tengu Pay. I'm one of the global entrepreneurs in residence at UMass. I have the greatest honor and the pleasure of welcoming David Frankel here tonight, who's going to share his fascinating story with us. David, I would like to start off with, you had already built and sold a company by the age of 25, Internet Solutions, back in South Africa. Despite that, you decided to go back to school, and you came here to Boston. From Cape Town to Cape Cod. Tell us a little bit about your journey.
Well, firstly, thanks so much for doing this, Chet, and really hats off to Bill and Jeff Goldman for making the connection, and my good friend Jeff Busgang for having been involved as the catalyst. And it's an absolute pleasure and a privilege to be here as an immigrant amongst, I hope, many more immigrants. As an entrepreneurs. So just thank you so much for the privilege of being here. I was lucky enough to start a company straight out of college. I had applied at the same time for a Fulbright scholarship, which I'd been unbelievably lucky to get. But I ended up deferring as I started an internet service provider when I was 22 years old, and my timing was exceptionally good. We ended up building what is today the largest ISP in the Southern Hemisphere, ultimately acquired by NTT, which is the largest telco in the world. And my partners and I sold that business in 1997, worked out a 3-year service agreement. I was on the board of the company which we'd listed on the London Stock Exchange. It was a top 50 company. But I was also going through an existential crisis, and it was one of those moments when I was probably as depressed as I've been in my life, and just thinking that the best was behind me. What was I going to do with the rest of my life? And I was sitting on the floor in my tiny apartment. We had my wife and I had no kids yet. She's a neurologist, and we'd both been our lives were mortgaged to our work. And I just said, doing an MBA is unfinished business. I'm an engineer by training. And I needed to change things up, so I reapplied in full and got back to business school, and that's what brought me back. And of course, my friends and colleagues, I was on the board of this company while I was at business school. Thought I was crazy, just thought that I was going to waste 2 years of my life. And I've always thought that some of the best things in my life happen when I'm going through these kind of there's the roller coaster, and it's up and it's down, and when you're at the bottom, sometimes that's when you're forced to make the tough decisions. And I also think in terms of being contrarian, of not going with the flow, but changing things up and challenging ourselves. And I think that as immigrants, we really, it is in some ways sometimes an ultimate challenge. It's you plunge yourself into a totally different environment where you feel like a complete outsider, and business school is obviously very, very different to that. It's a very welcoming environment. It's kind of cotton wool. It's coming to college and a master's degree is sometimes the very best way, because there are lots of people who are like you. They're in a different environment, and they're trying to kind of keep their head above water. But that's really the challenge of that, and feeling unfinished business, feeling I was, by that point, 29 years old, and I needed to change things up a bit. And if I was going to come live in the United States at some point, that seemed to be a good way to do it.
So you said you were on the board and also attending business school here in Boston. So were you flying in and out?
I was.
How was that? What was that like?
I was flying to board meetings in London, and I had one very interesting. I was lucky enough to be involved with the World Economic Forum in Davos. And
Yes.
and I'd been at the course was called Technology and Operations Management, and that morning I'd been in the course, and I'd flown that evening to a board meeting en route to Davos, and on the night afterwards I bumped into my professor at Davos, and he just looked at me and said, like, what are you doing
That's
here?
amazing.
But it did make for some interesting occurrences.
Awesome.
And getting into some trouble as well.
What kind of trouble, if you don't mind
my
sharing
attendance
us?
record wasn't perfect.
I guess a lot of us have that experience.
Yeah.
But you have a valid reason. I would be probably watching a movie or something. In one of your earlier interviews, you've talked a lot about, we sort of changing course in the conversation about immigrant entrepreneurs. You've you've made a lot of investments while you were at Harvard Business School, and you've talked about pattern recognition amongst entrepreneurs. Have you been able to recognize patterns that are distinct for immigrant entrepreneurs vis-a-vis American entrepreneurs?
So generally, when we talk about pattern recognition, we talk about sometimes in the context of investments, and then most importantly in the context of how we advise and help the companies that we invest in. And in fact, probably the greatest result of business school was that I met my two partners, Micah Rosenblum and Eric Paley, and first as an investor in their company, and then as a seed and angel investor in many 29 companies. But so when we talk about pattern recognition, the question is, well, what's the value you add as an investor? And the answer is, beyond buying the coffee, not much. But if there is any value, it's in pattern recognition. So in fact, someone earlier, I was talking to one of the GIRs earlier, and she said to me, Itsu's one of the GIRs, and she's at a company called PillPack, which I'm on the board of, and the board meeting's tomorrow, in fact. And a lot of what I think of ourselves as cross-pollinators, as bees, and because similar problems, right? Sometimes you need lobbyists, as we have. Sometimes you face the same legal issues. Sometimes it's about employment issues or recruiting, or is that the right hire? And I think a lot of good investors who traverse many boards are able to cross-pollinate and help in terms of what they've learned at other places, right? Obviously, that's not non-confidential. But this is a long lead up to your question. In terms of pattern recognition, it's very hard to generalize. And we have invested in, immigrants and non-immigrants across the board. And truly, we've been absolutely blind. We haven't thought twice about that. I do think that, I think that there are pros and cons of investing in immigrants. In some ways, people are hungry. They feel I bring my own experience to this, but you feel like an outsider. You feel like you've got to work really hard. You always feel like an outsider. And in fact, year by year, you reflect on the first year you were here, or the second year, or the third year, and you think to yourself, wow, now I've got some perspective on, I thought I had things kind of worked out by the end of that year, but 2-3 years on, now I realize how little I had worked out. On the other hand, as an immigrant, it's personally so in some ways there's a hunger, there's a drive to do well, there's a drive to succeed, which is remarkable as a generalization. But there's also personal issues, there are personal challenges. There's family at home, or what was home. And so making that work, I recognize the patterns. It's hard to say it's good or bad.
Sure. So did your own story play into some of those pattern recognition? Like, you started a company very early back in South Africa, you came to the US, you decided to start investing. So did part of your own story play into those investment decisions, or even working with other people in Boston?
Yeah, so it's hard to, have I favored immigrants?
No, I meant to say in the sense the challenges and the kind of issues that you overcome as an entrepreneur, did that play into your...
Yeah, so we, when we founded the firm, we had one thing we said unequivocally was we would never hire someone to work at the firm that hadn't been an entrepreneur, that hadn't had an entrepreneurial, because we were trying to build a firm that we wished had existed when we and our closest friends were raising funding. And we're not alone in this by any measure. There are many VCs that have been founded by operators, but we literally won't hire a principal or an associate that hasn't started a company. And our view is, if you haven't, you can't empathize. Right. Board members who say, do this, do this, do this, you've really got to have had that muscle memory. But then beyond that, my experiences in terms of, trying to fathom the community, trying to fit into the community in that. I think that I recognize those challenges in immigrant entrepreneurs that we have backed, and many names come to mind. Right. And I think that empathy has been helpful to them.
Is there any story you would like to share with us with one of those founders that you worked with?
I mean, I think of Davron, who's the founder of DataBox, a company that I'm on the board in Boston. And, his personal challenge to some degree was overcome by having a lot of the tech. So he has family back in Serbia, and by having, some of the tech there, having 10, 15 tech people, that's been one way which has been kind of personally and professionally very useful.
Okay, so great. I guess my next question was to ask if you've invested and worked with, but you've already answered that. In your own experience, has visa or immigration issues come in the way of your investment decisions? If you found an awesome founder, a great idea, you want to make an investment decision, but unfortunately for immigration reasons, the founder cannot remain in the country, were you forced in a way to decline that opportunity? I can't say that I've actually declined an opportunity because of that, but I've absolutely come face to face with this. I have, as an EIR at the university where I studied, I spend at least kind of 5 hours a month speaking to entrepreneurs, and I've come face to face with entrepreneurs who are saying, look, I'm going to try to do this, but I've got to get over my visa issues. If I think of the people we've tried to employ an associate out of Harvard, out of MBA, doing the MBA, where Jeff Goldman helped us, but eventually got an H-1B. But so there's no question in my mind. I'm here feeling very passionate about this issue that we train amazing people. We've got, particularly in this town, right? We've got unbelievable colleges and universities, and we literally should be stapling a visa to your graduation certificate, right? So it shouldn't be this hard. So I feel like I'm truly preaching to the choir here, because this is coming out of people who feel so passionately about this. Yes, I want to sort of move into the part where some of us here probably know that at Founder Collective, you've successfully institutionalized angel investing, which is one of the hardest things to do. Correct me if I'm wrong when I say this. Essentially, you've created and codified a set of best practices that helps you in investment decisions in entrepreneurs who don't necessarily have a data point or a metric that meets the investment criteria.
Yeah, so I'd say, 8-9 years ago, that feels much more true than it was today. The word successful, I think success is measured on the last thing you did, right? Sure. On the deal that I did, and I always say, I'll tell you in 5 years' time, if the strategy was successful. But certainly 8-9 years ago, we did try to institutionalize what we'd been doing as angel investors, and found it to be incredibly tough. But it comes down to empathy again. I think that the muscle memory of being an entrepreneur, the empathy, helps you recognize some of the patterns. And I think that, when I think of investing even, I think of context, opportunity, people, deal. Right. And that even as you think of context, that plays into immigrant entrepreneurs. Their context is different to non-immigrant entrepreneurs.
Right. Right. I guess it's sort of well established based on empirical data that there is a case for a startup visa for immigrant entrepreneurs. There's enough data points for all of us to know that it happens. It's required. But despite all of the evidence, lawmakers are slow to move, and they may cite that one of the reasons they cannot codify this into some sort of a startup visa is because a freshly minted graduate student from MIT has got an idea, but how do we know that this company is going to be successful, it's going to create jobs? So my question is that if there's a lawmaker here listening to this event, what advice would you offer in maybe coming up with some sort of a pattern recognition that can be codified in the form of a startup visa that could work for both the immigrants as well as for the country?
I'm glad I'm not a lawmaker. the startup visa, the fact that that still isn't a fait accompli here is a tremendous frustration. But I think it goes back to, in some way, and this is a partial answer to that word context, where I'm not sure that the lawmakers need to do this from scratch. Firstly, there are other country precedent. I think literally to the north of us, Canada has a reasonably good precedent.
Right.
And the other thing is in terms of context, the degree that the degree they studied here. So STEM, the investors that they may have or may not have behind them, the amount of the investment, the people they employ. Like, I think that there could be criteria established, entry-level criteria that could help those lawmakers get that started. And again, it doesn't feel like they're reinventing the wheel. There seems to be a lot of precedent.
Right. So I'm going to go back to the last question. I wish we had more time. We could talk all night. In one sentence, what advice would you like to offer our entrepreneurs and young aspiring entrepreneurs here tonight? What would you like them to take away from this event?
There's a good Churchill quote, which is when the going gets tough, keep going, right? And whether you're starting a company, whether you're going through this visa process, like everything else in life, just keep going. I think there are lots of people out there who've got it done. I think that Boston and this ecosystem is very special in terms of trying to assist and trying to make it happen. And the very fact that you're attending an event like this means I think you're 75% or 80% of the way there in terms of getting to the people that can help. So just keep going. That's my advice.
Okay, great. David, one last thing. If anyone here wants to get in touch with you, is there a way they can reach you? What's the best way?
So I'm on Twitter, LinkedIn, and david@foundercollective.com, and standing by.
Thank you so much for your time tonight.
Thank you.